The 1999 directorial debutante movie, The Blair Witch Project, is one of the most unconventional and yet convincing horror films of all time. The movie's success could be established by the fact that it was made under a modest budget of $200,000, amassing a whopping $248 million box office collection, making it one of the highest-grossing films that year. The movie owes its success to the documentary-style cinematography that didn't have any planned jump scares and ghost scenes, but just regular video camera footage of three young people who have been stranded in the woods amid some inexplicable incidents haunting them and their growing desperation to escape before dying under mysterious circumstances. Even though the latter two movies didn't experience the commercial praise and success as the first one, they surely did a good job of extenuating the spooky stories associated with the Blair Witch. The movies explore various different versions of the origins of the witch and how, for ages, she continues to terrorize the people of Burkittsville. Her intentions, however, remain unclear. But grasping from Rustin Parr's story, it seems like the witch seeks vengeance. The movies and comics also make references to various practices of black magic and witchcraft, which add to the curiosity in the audience. A prime reason why the Blair Witch legend continues to remain popular among people is because it's open-ended, with no theory entirely explaining or refuting the origins and motivations of the witch. Each movie or comic leaves its audience or readers on a cliffhanger, after which they're left to speculate on their end. This ultimately gets them hooked on any new version of the story that emerges in the form of a movie or comic. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. Now, this is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The Blair Witch Project, 1999. The movie starts with a disclaimer that in October 1994, three filming major students named Heather, Mike, and Josh went missing in the woods while shooting a documentary about exploring the legend of the Blair Witch in Burkittsville, Maryland. Upon investigation, a year later, their discarded cameras were recovered, and the movie purports to be the footage found in those cameras, which they used to shoot while they were in the woods. The movie begins with Heather cheerfully posing to the camera at her home and introducing herself while Josh records. She declares her plans about leaving this weekend to pursue a documentary come investigation on the folklore of the Blair Witch in the town of Burkittsville. She then introduces a couple of books she'd be taking along, such as How to Stay Alive in the Woods and an old dusty discolored book that narrates the story of what happened at Coffin Rock. As per the schedule, they pick up Mike and head to a convenience store to pick up some food and other essentials. They begin shooting their documentary from a cemetery in Burkittsville. Heather narrates the story that this small village in the town of Maryland was originally named Blair. She further states that the place has an unusually high number of graves that belong to young children who died around the year 1940. However, no one in the town recalls that something strange might have transpired in those years. Elated over having their first shot, they make their way into the town and begin interviewing people. The residents candidly recall how they heard about the Blair Witch stories growing up from their grandparents or their neighbors. A middle-aged woman with a noisy kid shares that the scariest version of the story that she's heard revolved around the sudden disappearance of two men who went camping on a site where the alleged witch was supposed to hunt. An older resident and a young man narrate the story of a man in the 1940s whom they refer to as Mr. Parr. Parr was accused of having murdered 7 kids in his basement. Apparently, Parr would take 2 kids along with him and would make one face the corner while he brutally killed the other one and then do the same with the other kid. In between the interviews, Heather gets to know about an outcast in the town, Mary Brown, and decides to visit her. She's an old lady living in a rather deserted house and has a weird face and body structure. Her face is unusually long, eyes too hollow, body skeleton thin, and has a big cross across her neck. She recites the story about how one time she'd gone fishing with her father in the woods and suddenly she sensed a creepy and incredibly hairy arm on her shoulder. When she turned to look, she noticed that it was a woman who had hair like a horse from head to toe. After calling it for the day, they head back to their hotel and just grab a couple of beers and scotch and chat before they begin their day 2 of the project. They drive to a small stream and interview 2 fishermen, and the older one among them even warns them about the forest being haunted. The men then tell her the story of a young girl named Robin Weaver who went missing in 1888. When she returned 3 days later, she talked about an old woman who seemed to be levitating. The other older man tells her that all of these are tied to Coffin Rock and that this area has been haunted by that old woman for ages now. The filmmaker trio then drives into the woods, parks the car on the edge of the road, and heads into the woods. The 3 hiked to Coffin Rock, which is believed to have been the site where 5 men were brutally murdered and their bodies ritualistically slaughtered. They were tied up, one man's hands tied to the feet, forming a solid human structure. The investigators revealed that all of these heinous acts took place while the men were alive and resisting. The faces of the men were cut in a manner that depicted an indescribable script. However, later the bodies disappeared without any clue. The following day, it begins raining, and the three try to hike back to the car but can't find it before dark. At this point, both Mike and Josh are visibly disturbed, realizing that they're lost and they're in the middle of nowhere. But Heather calms them, claiming that she knows they're heading in the right direction and they'll reach tomorrow morning for sure. Heather and Mike are woken up by the sounds of someone's footsteps at 3 in the morning, but yet again, they don't find anyone. The next morning, they find 3 cans built beside their tent, one on each corner. The three freak out as they realize that these piles weren't present last night when they set up the camp. Things get worse when Heather learns that her map has been missing. After a heated altercation, the three try to remain positive and start their trail. While crossing a small stream, Mike suddenly starts laughing hysterically and reveals that he had indeed thrown the map into the creek yesterday, as he was frustrated that it did them no good in getting them back to their car. This provokes a fight between the trio, as they realize that they're definitely lost and are stranded in the middle of the woods with no direction to positively lead them back to their car. Collectively, they decide to head south while using the compass and soon discover a place that has creepy, voodoo-like stick figures hanging all over the trees. When night falls, they decide not to light the fire in the hope that they won't hear the mysterious noises again. But that night, something scarier happens. That night, they hear the sounds of children laughing and running around, and suddenly their camp starts to shake violently, and they all run frantically into the woods to hide until dawn. Upon returning the next morning, they find their tent disheveled, their stuff dispersed, and Josh's equipment covered in weird slime-like material. The three begin walking again in the hope of making it to their car. But to their horror, they discover that they've been walking around in a circle the entire day as they've reached back to an identical stream they'd crossed over in the morning. At this point, all of them have probably lost most of their hope and sanity, but in an instinct to survive, they decide to camp once again. Waking up the next day, they find Josh missing. Heather tries to call out to him, and Mike thinks that he might have gone to the river, but Josh doesn't return even when the day ends. Heather's worst fear is realized the next morning when she notices sticks bundled together with a blood-soaked piece of cloth that belonged to Josh. She's left petrified after finding a piece of Josh's tooth, a finger, a large piece of his tongue, and some strands of hair inside the bundle. Distraught and scared, she decides not to tell Mike about this. When they camp for the night, Heather records a video of her sobbing and apologizing to her, Mike's, and Josh's mum for having come up with this horrendous idea that's endangered their lives and has left them lost, cold, hungry, and hunted in the cursed forest. That night, they hear Josh's agonizing cries, and Mike begins following their source. They reach the abandoned ruins of Rustin Parr's house and go inside it. The house seems desolate and wrecked, with the roof falling apart as well. Heather and Mike begin exploring and recording the interior of the house and try calling out to Josh. They come across Josh's clothes discarded on the stairs and notice the handprints of children plastered all over the concrete walls. Mike frantically runs downstairs to the basement, hoping to find Josh, and Heather follows. While descending the stairs, the walls beside it have certain demonic verses and symbols engraved on them that are captured by Mike's camcorder, and as he reaches the basement, his camera is suddenly knocked down by something or someone. Heather follows Mike to the basement and finds him standing at the corner, facing the wall. Her terrified cries and wails don't seem to affect Mike, and before she can reach over to him, an incoherent force strikes her and her camera falls to the ground. The Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, 2000. Ever since the release of the documentary footage on the Blair Witch project of the 3 missing students, Burkittsville has become a tourist epicenter. Jeff Patterson, a town resident, former psychiatrist, and obsessed fan of the movie, decides to profit from the movie's popularity and organizes a group tour to the actual locations featured in the movie. Graduate student Stephen Parker joins the group along with his pregnant girlfriend, Tristan Ryler, along with Erica Gierson, who is a Wiccan and daughter of an Episcopal minister, and considers Blair Witch to be her ideal, Kim Diamond, who is a goth with psychic proclivities that might facilitate conversation with the Blair Witch. The group starts off their tour and decides to camp at the ruins of Parr's house. On arrival, Jeff suddenly notices a large tree in the center of the house that he says didn't exist before. Jeff then places radio surveillance cameras in hope of capturing supernatural occurrences that might happen throughout the night. The group then sets up a campfire for the night when they're all startled by a scream. Soon after that, another group arrives to camp at the same site, and the two groups get into an argument. To mediate the situation, Stephen tells the newly arrived group that they should rather camp at the Coffin Rock, given there lay corpses of people in pentagonal shape since the 18th century. Excited as the new group leaves for the Coffin Rock, Stephen reveals that he just lied about the Coffin Rock to evade the group and that there are no corpses there. The group drinks and smokes marijuana all night, and they all get knocked out of their senses. Waking up in the morning, they're shocked to find Stephen and Tristan's research documents shredded and dispersed through the woods, and the camera and other equipment destroyed. Jeff's camera's damaged tapes are recovered beneath the house foundation at the same spot where Blair Witch Project tapes were found in 1995. From this point in time, numerous unexplained, unexpected, and creepy incidents incidents begin unfolding. Tristan, Stephen's girlfriend, is rushed to the nearest hospital as she suddenly complains of bleeding. At the hospital, Tristan finds out that she's had a miscarriage, which leaves her devastated. After Tristan is discharged, the group returns to Jeff's house, which is an industrial building that was formerly a factory. Tristan rests and tries to recover from the trauma of having lost her child. She also narrates to Stephen a nightmare of hers and says that she could sense some unexplained presence in the house and that they should leave soon. The rest of the group begins to review Jeff's camera tape. They soon uncover some bizarre activities through those clips. They come across the blurry video of the coffin rock and some corpses lying there in a pentagonal fashion. In one of the recordings, Erica is seen circling a tree, nude. Aghast, she tries to convince others that she has no memory of doing such a thing and goes back to pray and perform some shady ritual in the other room. When Kim tries to console her, Erica reveals the rash-like symbols have suddenly covered her body and proclaims these have been marked by the witch for death. Kim too notices similar symbols on her body at different places. Kim then drives to the town to pick up coffee and alcohol, but her appearance displeases the store cashier, after which she gets into an argument with her and ends up grabbing the cashier by her neck, warning her about not messing up with Kim about her appearance ever again. Upon returning, she encounters a group of children on the road, standing together and holding each other's hands. In an attempt to avoid running into them, she crashes the van into a tree. When she looks back, she realizes that they've strangely disappeared, and this kinda scares the shit out of her. Upon returning to Jeff's home, Kim discovers a bloody nail file stuck among the bottles of beer she'd purchased. The following morning, Stephen wakes up Tristan and asks her to get ready to leave for home. Jeff looks outside his house and is shocked to notice that the entire front end of his van has been carved into the point that it's undrivable, and now they can't get out of the forest. Kim defends herself, claiming that she'd gotten into a minor accident that wouldn't have caused such huge damage. It's then that Tristan makes certain disturbing claims about the fact that she'd seen the same dead children in her dreams, whom Kim came across yesterday. She tells the group that they're all gonna die and that they should take notice of the weird signs and bruises appearing on their bodies. Meanwhile, the group notices that Erica has been missing for quite some time now. They look out for her, but she's nowhere to be found. Soon, when they're unable to find her, they make a call to her father to inform him about his daughter's sudden disappearance, but are bewildered when the secretary tells them that the Episcopal minister has no children of his own. Later, the county sheriff Cravens calls Jeff and informs him that the group that had gone camping at Coffin Rock has been found brutally murdered and their bodies mutilated. The sheriff states that he suspects Jeff's involvement in this heinous crime and warns him against absconding. This raises tension among the group members, and they begin blaming each other for their collective misery. Stephen then notices Erica stripped naked and dancing against a tree outside. It seems like she's been hypnotized and is murmuring something. When Stephen tries to reach out to her, she just disappears. Shortly after, Stephen goes to his room and notices that Tristan has gone hysterical and is jumping on the bed. He tries to calm her, but she's terrified. She then tells him the story of a young girl in the 18th century who, on account of being a witch, was banished to the forest, where some children used to torture her by making markings on her body by using some sharp instruments. The young girl soon succumbed to these injuries and was thrown into the water. This very girl is believed to have become the Blair Witch, who continues to haunt the town and inhabitants of Burkittsville to date. Stephen tries to calm down Tristan, disapproving of all this as just being a story. The group stumbles upon Erica's naked corpse in a closet. Tristan tells the group about widdershins, which is a term meaning to do something anti-clockwise or backward. This leads Kim to suggest playing Jeff's tapes in reverse. When they do so, they're horrified when they notice Tristan commanding all the group members into shattering all the research papers and destroying the cameras. When the group tries to confront Tristan, she claims that she isn't Tristan but the Blair Witch herself. She's the one who had killed Erica, and she'd kill them as well. She puts a rope by her neck, stands in the corner, and also reveals that she'd killed Tristan's child, listening to which Stephen loses his control and pushes her down, leading to her death. As soon as she dies, the remaining people suddenly get a vision where, under Tristan's influence, they've killed all the members of the group at the Coffin Rock. The next morning, the cops arrest the trio on grounds of manslaughter and murder of Erica and Tristan. During interrogation, they defend themselves, claiming that all of them had been under Tristan's influence beyond their control, which made them commit these crimes. They even claim that they'd recorded Tristan's confession in their videos. But when the cops play the video, more astonishing details are revealed. Kim had that night not just tried to strangle the cashier, but had indeed killed her. Similarly, Jeff is shown hiding Erica's dead body in the closet and Stephen pushing Tristan. All of them plead innocent, claiming that these videos are all doctored and none of these are true. The cops, however, don't seem convinced and charge all of them with homicide and arrest them. Toward the end credit scene, a new batch of tourists head to the forest to further explore the dark tales and secrets of the Blair Witch. Blair Witch 2016. In 2014, 25-year-old James Donahue stumbled upon a fairly random video on YouTube that, towards its end, contained a still of a woman's reflection in a mirror whom James believes to be his sister, Heather, who had gone missing ever since her trek to the Black Hills for the Blair Witch documentary in 1994. Post her disappearance. Despite rigorous search and investigation, no trace of either of the three was found. It seemed that they just disappeared into thin air. In the hope of finding his sister, or at least bringing closure to himself and his family, James initiates the idea of visiting the Black Hill forests with his three friends, namely Lisa, Peter, and Peter's girlfriend, Ashley. Lisa, being a film student, is excited about the excursion as it would enable her to document James's search, which she decides to call the absence of closure. Lisa also prepares all the necessities that would come to their help in the woods, which include walkie-talkies, GPS devices, flashlights, drones, and most importantly, high-tech cameras. The group then decides to visit the video uploader, Lane. Lane is a local in Burkittsville and says that he and his girlfriend Talia would tell the group about the location from where the tape was recovered only if they allowed them to join. The couple reiterated that the footage was authentic and had been indeed captured by Heather and her group. Peter seems off about taking along Lane and Talia, but since they're local, he realizes that they could be of help to the group. The group, along with the couple, head to the woods, where they encounter a wooden board that carries the warning of no entry after nightfall, but they ignore it and make their way into the woods. As they advance, Lane begins narrating to them the story of Rustin Parr, the brutal murder of 6 young children in the basement of his house, and how he claimed that he did all that on the command of the witch herself. While trying to cross over a stream, Ashley injures her foot and begins bleeding, but still manages to walk. Night descends, and the group sets up the camp. Talia then tells the story of Blair Witch's origin. She says that back in the 18th century, there was a young woman named Ellie Kedwood who was accused by some children in town and their parents of witchcraft. Taking notice of this, Ellie was banished to the woods, where she was apparently hung from a tree with heavy rocks suspended from her legs and shoulders and left to suffer and be tortured. When people went back to dispose of her body after a few days, they didn't find anything and assumed that the wild animals might have predated on her. After this, weird and inexplicable events begin unfolding in the town. The children who accused Ellie of witchcraft suddenly disappear without a trace, followed by their families and then some other people, all under mysterious circumstances. Panic gripped the rest of the inhabitants, and then they soon left, deserting the town. Talia then claims that Ellie is assumed to be the Blair Witch, named after the ancient name Blair of the town of Burkittsville. She's believed to be so terrifying to look at that no one who had encountered her had ever managed to escape. The group goes to sleep, but is woken up by strange noises during the night. Waking up, Talia tells the group that Lane is missing. She, along with James, goes deep into the woods to find Lane, but is startled when Lane suddenly appears before them, claiming that he too had gone in search of the source of the weird noises. When all wake up the following morning, they realize that it's 2 p.m., which means that they've slept straight for 12 hours. They then begin to notice even more unsettling details. Eerie stick-like figures made from wood and bark hung around the trees of their campsite, and their camp circumferenced by stones. When the group begins their trail again, Lisa notices the similar wooden twine in Lane's backpack and confronts him. He and Talia admit to having created them to convince the group, especially Peter, to believe in the curse of the Blair Witch that haunts the forest. Upset at this, the group now suspects the couple's intentions and thus excludes them from the group. Lane tries to defend himself, but they continue with their journey, leaving the duo to fend for themselves. The group, with the help of GPS, kept tracking their direction and advancing into the woods, but were halted when Ashley's injury made it difficult for her to walk any further. To their horror, they realize that they're at the same place as their campsite, which implies that they'd just been going in circles for all these 4 hours. Exhausted, they set up the camp, and Peter tries to nurse Ashley's wound, but even before he can begin, she groans in pain, and to his utter disbelief, Peter notices something moving inside her wound, indicating the presence of a potential parasite. Peter leaves to collect firewood, but ends up being chased by an unknown entity. A tree suddenly falls on him, and before his friends can reach out to his rescue, he's dragged away off-screen. Lisa and James at midnight wake up to Lane and Talia, who are in a disheveled state beyond recognition. The duo says that they've been wandering in the forest for 6 days now, and haven't seen any sunlight even once. Assuming that the forest was playing tricks on them, Lane runs off, leaving behind Talia with Lisa and James. They wake up the next morning at 7 a.m., but notice that it's still pitch dark outside, and that larger stick figures have been strung around the camp. Talia notices clumps of her hair tied to one of the stick figures, and is left horrified by this. Ashley wakes up and accuses Talia of having crafted the stick figures yet again, and snaps the one with her hair in half. As she does this, Talia too is torn apart into half the same way as the stick figure. Before they can make sense of this, some unseen force lifts their tent into the air and the group gets separated. Ashley is then seen climbing over a tree to recover a stuck-up drone, but is pushed out by some unforeseen force and falls to the ground. As she hits the ground, she's dragged away similarly to Peter by virtue of some unseen and unknown force. It begins to rain, and Lisa stumbles upon James at Rustin Parr's house. James claims that it's the same house from which the video was shot and insists on going inside, given that he believes that Heather might still be in there. Lisa tries to dissuade him, but it's all in vain. James steps inside the house, and the door behind him shuts by itself. Lisa notices a scary, long-limbed creature levitating behind her on the tree. Petrified, she too runs into the house. James makes his way through the different doors in the house to a corridor and comes across a room where he sees Peter standing in the corner, facing the wall. He calls out to him, but he doesn't reply and suddenly disappears. James then decides to follow the footsteps he heard from the upper deck and begins to follow them. He notices a woman in weird clothing and believes her to be Heather and follows her to another floor. He soon realizes that this house seems like a maze and he's been trapped in it. He comes across the woman he'd been following, but her face can't be recognized and she too disappears like Peter. Meanwhile, Lisa, inside the basement of the house, encounters Lane, who seems frantic. He murmurs something on the line that anyone who enters the forest is trapped and now has to follow her instructions, after which he hits Lisa on her head and throws her into a tunnel. Lisa escapes the tunnel but is yet again attacked by Lane. This time, however, she stabs Lane to death with a knife. Lisa took Lane's camera and began running in search of James. She runs through the corridor and then comes across a room where, in the mirror, she sees her reflection, which seems similar to the woman shown in the YouTube video whom James believed to be Heather. This implies that it was a paradox video made to lure them all into the woods. Lisa then reunites with James in the attic, and a bright light flashes from the outside for a second but then goes off. James tells Lisa to face the corner and warns her against turning back to face the creature behind them. James believes that if they don't look at the witch, she won't be able to kill them. However, the witch tricks James into looking back by using Heather's voice to call him. Lisa begs him not to, but he turns around and vanishes from sight instantly. Lisa now realizes that she's the only surviving person left, so she uses Lane's camcorder to look behind at the creature. The creature uses James' voice to apologize to Lisa and gets her to turn back and kills her. Her camcorder falls to the ground and shuts. The Blair Witch Chronicles. The 4-issue comic book tales explore the unconventional stories and folklore related to the Blair Witch and its origin in association with Ellie Kedward in the 18th century. It expands on the mystery behind Coffin Rock and the sinister murders that took place there. The tragic events that followed in Rustin Parr's house involved a gruesome murder of children in the 1940s to the 1950s, schoolboy pranks gone wrong till the 1990s, and a Wiccan coven's attempts to cleanse the woods and unravel the forbidden secrets of the Blair Witch. Blair Witch: Dark Testaments. The story begins with Davis Crane, an old fellow behind bars, narrating his story of the night before when, under the influence of some intangible force, he tried smothering the Carraway twins, Martin and Maria, both infants, but failed. He then continues detailing his association with the Parr twins, Dale and Rustin, since the time he was a young boy. He tells how, out of the two brothers, Dale was the charismatic one who often overshadowed Rustin. But Davis also knows that there was something very unsettling about Rustin. He just felt plain wrong. He claims that Rustin had an affinity with nature and animals and didn't have it in him to harm a soul ever. This is the reason why many people refuse to believe that Rustin could have killed those kids in pure cold blood. They assert that Rustin was instead used as an instrument by the witch to pursue her sinister deeds. Davis, however, recounts an incident where he once saw Rustin get angry over his brother's action when Dale had killed a squirrel, but that didn't imply Rustin throwing punches at him. He just shunned him from being his brother forever. But strangely, the next day, they were back, joined at the hip, seemingly inseparable. He then tells the story of Matthew Patterson, the local handyman and alcoholic's altercation with the Parr brothers one random evening. Patterson hit Rustin to the extent that he started bleeding. When Davis tries helping Rustin, he murmurs how an old woman, a witch, visits Dale. The next day, Patterson's young daughter dies under mysterious circumstances, and the doctors discover a small stick bundle from her bowel. Following this incident, weird things began appearing on the Parr's threshold, from trinkets to tokens and other offerings, in the hope that whatever happened to the poor girl wouldn't happen to their kids. Davis says he tried visiting the Parrs once, but Mrs. Parr insisted on not meeting Rustin as he needs peace and quiet, and that Dale had accompanied his father to the woods for hunting. After a few days, it's rumored that Dale was shot dead by his father in the forest for reasons unknown. However, conspiracy theories about it spread like wildfire, and the one Davis most precisely remembers is the one his mother told. Davis's mother, Rose, said that Dale was not the Parr's own child, but a witch's. Davis has an instant urge to inform Rustin about this secret, but the latter never returns back to school, ever. Davis, however, came across Rustin once several years later on the unfortunate day when Matthew Patterson was hit by a truck in the middle of the road. When Davis tried calling out to Rustin to help him take Patterson to the hospital, he just ran away, not even looking back. That day, something more eerie had happened. When Patterson spotted Rustin, he was infuriated and charged toward him, asking him about what they did to his daughter. But for some reason, Patterson's legs froze. He couldn't move an inch. He was horrified when he realized that a shadow of a young man had held his legs and had ultimately led him to his death. Davis had then left Burkittsville in lieu of a better future. He'd worked as an English teacher and also served in the military. When his old age approached, he'd retreated back to his home in Burkittsville. He believed in countering all the unduly propagated superstition that had plagued the city for years now by the power of modern education. But soon, one day, he comes across Rustin Parr once again. Parr seemed distressed and said that he was now finished as he'd done something that he shouldn't have done. Later, the news of the murder of the children and the recovery of their bodies from the basement of Rustin's house left the entire town, including Davis, traumatized. Davis then gets back to the present and explains what had led him to smother the twins. He said he noticed Dale's shadow reaching out to those children. In order to save the kids from a fate worse than death, he'd taken such an immoral step. Now, behind bars, Davis awaits his special reunion with Dale, whom he knows is hiding in the shadows and who will leave once the lights go off. Untitled upcoming movie. The upcoming installment of the Blair Witch franchise is supposedly being developed by Lionsgate to be launched as a streaming exclusive film. The project brings together Oliver Park as director, Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez as producers. The film was officially announced to be in development at the CinemaCon held in April 2024. Marvelous verdict. We can conclude that the Blair Witch legend is a fine combination of gore, violence, horror, and psychological thrill that's left its audience mystified for 2 decades now. Every movie scene or every story in the comic manages to keep the viewers hooked in anticipation of what's to follow next. Toward the end, we're all left to dwell on unanswered questions that the movies and the comics pose to us. What on earth had happened to Heather, Josh, and Mike? What had exactly transpired at the Coffin Rock, and why? Who were those children whose voices terrorized the 3 in the forest? If they were dead, well, then how come even after extensive research their bodies have never been found? Why did Rustin Parr kill those 7 children, and under whose influence? Did anyone among those children escape? Why was Mike facing the corner toward the wall at Parr's basement? Is the Black Hill Forest an illusion that's controlled by the witch? What do those unsettling stick figure voodoo structures indicate? And most importantly, would the witch return with her hauntings once again? And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks everyone.
Understood. You have to do what she tells you!